Hi, my name is Jordan Tanner, and this is my psychosocial assessment. So, I want to briefly introduce my client. She is going underneath the alias of Jean Lyon. She is a 40-year-old African American female who presented to the Interactive Resource Center in need of housing, employment, medical care, and resources for alcohol misuse. Now, my client, she was initially referred from the Family Service of Piedmont, the FSP, where she is currently receiving therapeutical services. My client also has a history of trauma, specifically sexual trauma, substance misuse, and she has a history of family separation, specifically with her own children, where she's estranged from, her partner, and her parents, of course. And then also, my client also has a previous suicide ideation and a previous suicide attempt, where we additionally created a safety plan for her. So, with client diversity, Jean has multiple characteristics that can intersect and cause barriers for her. So, for instance, her being an African American and being in a lower class already creates barriers for her. So, for instance, her being African American, having three kids, being a single mother already portrays a negative stigma on her. And there's also a negative stigma with addiction. So sometimes people might view this as they might say, oh, this person has made bad choices, and that's the reason why they're like this. Or they might view this person as lazy. However, this isn't the case for each individual, especially if they're unhoused and using drugs. Because specifically with my client in particular, she did not start using alcohol until she had her specific assault with sexual assault from her own father. And that is when she turned to alcohol in itself. So it's not always the case where this person just naturally just chose this bad thing and now they're in the situation. So that's why it's always important and one of the aspects that I was mindful of when I was speaking to her. So there are some structural inequalities as well. We have lack of healthcare, lack of employment, and lack of housing. So, in this manner, specifically with my client, um, how should I say, like she's had multiple jobs in her previous history, and of course, she's often lost them due to her alcohol misuse. So sometimes, if she's might, or should say, if there's a case where she might be applying to somewhere, and that employer looks at her history and sees that she might have an alcohol problem, they might be less likely to hire her because of that. Even if my client is currently sober, or even if my client is currently seeking rehab treatment, they might not trust this individual. There's also a lack of housing. So, something that we see a lot, especially at my internship, sometimes there are some shelters where they might require an individual, if they have a mental health illness, that has to be treated in order to be in that shelter. Now, sometimes that's not a barrier, but for some cases, for some people, that can create a barrier for them, and it's one less place where we can look for shelter for them. And then we have a lack of healthcare. I have this up here because sometimes we do receive clients who have come straight from the hospital, specifically like the ER section, and they are dropped off at the IRC with their wristband still on. And sometimes, depending on the story, it could be a matter of maybe this client has a condition that they really don't know or understand about. Maybe they have low blood sugar. Maybe they're consistently going to the ER because they're constantly falling out and they don't have the proper tools to help or the proper foods to eat to maintain their blood sugar. So they're continuously going back to the ER over and over and over again. And sometimes, and maybe this is maybe due to the environment that they're in, specifically in ER, that whoever is seeing them is not really taking a deeper look into this client and figure out maybe this person has some type of barrier. Maybe it's food, maybe it's transportation to get to this specific place, or whatever it may be. But sometimes we also have a barrier with that when our individuals or where our clients can't receive proper resources within the healthcare system. So when I was considering all these options, my approach with my client was using a strength-based language. I was making sure that I was able to empower her to ensure that Jean felt heard, supported, while also acknowledging how larger systems can contribute to her struggles. So one of the things that I would use would be motivational interviewing or cognitive behavioral therapy. And with CBT, that was a really big one, especially where I'm currently placed at, because I do have some clients where sometimes say if it is substance misuse and they have gone through treatment and it doesn't work for them for whatever reason, sometimes they have the mentality of, this is all I am, this is all I'm ever going to be, and I just have to live with it. Sometimes they come in with negative self-talk, negative things of like, I'm worthless, I'm not deserving, things of that nature. So sometimes I do get to incorporate CBT and trying to help them alter that thought, or try to help them figure out, well, why are they thinking that way and how we can change that. So with theoretical perspective, looking at Jean's situation from a theoretical perspective, when using behavioral theories in the in-person environment perspective, Jean often models the social learning theory as she has observed others using cocaine on the streets. When looking at the ecosystem theory and how it applies to Jean, she has been influenced by many factors throughout her environment. So, for example, when her father sexually assaulted her, she had easy access to alcohol within her own home. And she mentioned that, her father had a bar and she was able to get into that at a young age. So things like her environment kind of shifted and played a part of some of the decisions or some of the outcomes that happened to her. So, with trying to assess with how these theories apply to her, or trying to understand Jane and how I was able to assess her based off this theory, I was able to one figure out how her trauma led to coping with alcohol in general, especially at an early age on. Not only that, but I was able to get information from my client based off of that, where I found out, how young she was when the assault happened, and that she never received treatment for that when she was a kid, and even as an adult growing up. It wasn't until a couple months ago where she finally was able to start therapy. And then I also found out that, or I should say, I kind of like figured, how little her family support system is, and that she doesn't have too many people to lean on. Again, she's estranged from her children, her parents, and her partner. Outside of having just one friend to really talk to, she doesn't have too much of family support. And then lastly, I was able to figure out how much resilience and hope Jean has overall to become a better person. One thing that she always would mention during our assessment was that she was doing this because she wants to be a better mother. She wants to be a better person. Everything kind of fell back on, she's doing this for her kids. So I was glad I was able to figure that out, because if there's ever a time where she might feel, a little down, where she needs to pick me up, we can always go back to her hope, her thing that's keeping her anchored is her children. So with agency and community, with the IRC, we provide case management. We're able to patient navigate our clients. So that can be walking our client to the nurse practitioner, maybe walking them to FSP, or sometimes we could like take it a step further. Maybe some clients need a little bit of a push. So sometimes if they need like to make a medical appointment, basically. Sometimes we can either call and remind them that, hey, you have this appointment, or we could take it a step further and we can meet them at their specific appointment to kind of be there for support. And then of course we can always do referrals and resources. And then we also have FSP, Family Service of the Piedmont. Again, they offer therapy services with mental health, with child abuse, domestic violence, and substance use. And they also offer financial stability. So, with some limitations, one of the biggest one is transportation. With our clients, big part of it is that A, they don't have the means to kind of get to where they need to go. Or it's B, we don't have bus passes anymore to distribute to our clients for them to show up either to the IRC or to their doctor's appointment. So sometimes we have to get crafty on how we can help them with that. So for instance, if a individual has Medicaid, they can set up a doctor's appointment and Medicaid will provide them transportation for that appointment. And sometimes our clients do not know that. So sometimes we have to educate them on that specific feature. Another option might be look out for specials. Sometimes Park Bus offers free rides every now and again. So sometimes it's just a matter of checking to see if it's something like that, or if they're offering individuals to ride the bus at a cheaper rate. So then we have resource shortages. Sometimes, or I should say, the biggest one we face really is having shelters being closed, or they have like limited spaces for individuals to sleep at. And this is a hard one because a lot of the big ticket items that our clients need when they're coming to the IRC is that they want a bed, they want to sleep somewhere tonight. And with a lack of availability to place them at a shelter, it becomes a huge limitation for our clients. And that is also the case for my specific client as well. And then we have inconsistent follow up. Now, this can be part of like a client not having the transportation to follow up. Again, that also provides a barrier. Or sometimes the client may not, or maybe the client is able to come see us, but they're not able to specifically follow up with us. And that can kind of create a limitation, especially if the client doesn't have like a point of contact, like a phone number or an email. Because sometimes we might have a facility like a shelter list call us back saying, hey, so and so can have a bed, they have availability. But if our client doesn't consistently show up and they don't have a point of contact, they might miss out on something like that. So that becomes another issue as well. So here we have advocacy. So with our current issue, my client again, she's living on the streets or sometimes she might house hop. So the advocacy focus would be finding more transitional or cheaper permanent housing options for women and families. Because sometimes some shelter lists, although there are some where they offer some for women, specifically just for women or women and families, some shelters don't. It's just strictly for women and men and no children. So sometimes it's just a matter of navigating, trying to find the right thing for the client. But this is important because if a client's able to have like a stable place to live, especially if this place is, clean, they don't have to, worry at night if something's going to happen to them. They don't constantly have to be on guard in their sleep in fear someone's going to hurt them or assault them, or be in fear that they're going to wake up and their stuff has been taken. That is a big thing that happens, or I should say, that I've seen happen at my facility where the person woke up, they were sleeping on the streets, and someone took their stuff. And there's a lot of trauma within that just because of how little they currently have already. So, just sheltering them in general is not going to eliminate all the other barriers, of course, but having their own home, having their own space where they can at least feel safe and warm at night could at least help eliminate one less barrier for them. And then we have stages of change. I want to bring this up because my client is currently in the preparation slash action phase, and maybe more so the action phase. She's self aware of her substance misuse, and she has actively gotten treatment for it in the past where she put herself in rehab. And she's currently in therapy right now seeking services. So my client is putting in the work. It's just a matter of her trying to sustain it. And then we have goals. So for my clients, the way how we kind of navigated this, her biggest one was to continue therapy for mental health and substance use services. So with my client, when she had mentioned previous ideation of suicide in a previous attempt, of course, that's to notify my director, and we were going to do a safety plan. So with our safety plan, we kind of talked about what that looks like, and with we always have a person at risk. We always want them to receive some type of treatment. Of course, they can refuse, but in this case, my client, or to say my director wanted us to do something like with FSP, but my client was already in that already. So it was kind of a mutual agreement that we were going to continue out to see how her therapy was going. With my client, she mentioned that it was going mediocre, but she mentioned that she still wanted to continue to see what it looked like. So that's something that we're going to follow up on to see what that looks like for her. And part of it was because she recognizes that, she needs additional help outside of what she was doing. So the second thing was to be patient navigated to the nurse practitioner. So for this, my client, for employment wise, she did have a job already lined up. She just needed a tuberculosis shot for it. So this one was great in particular, just because it was very attainable and it was manageable. That was something I was going to be able to help her that day. And I'm always trying to make sure my client can leave with something, even if it's just a resource list or some type of resource. But with that, that was something she could really get that day and there. So that one was also kind of mutually agreed upon, especially after we got our initial assessment out the way. Once she was able to get that tuberculosis shot, she could finish up with her application, or not her application, but to submit the other things she needed for her specific job. That way she can start making some money and start saving in hopes to eventually look into something more serious than transitional housing, maybe something like permanent housing. And then, of course, lastly, we have housing shelter. Of course, my client is still sleeping on the streets. So the biggest thing was we looked at shelter resource lists. And again, because it's such a big ticket item, it's not feasible always to get a client a bed that day and there. So we were able to give her we're able to give her a resource list where she can call and I can call on her behalf as well. And again, when we were going to meet back up, we were going to see what we find and if she put her name on any of these lists. And of course, at least on my end, if someone called letting me know if they have a bed available, I would be able to reach out to that specific client, just because she did have a contact number and we could be in touch. So at least for the way how we went about our goals, um, everything was mutually agreed upon. She already had like a mindset of what she kind of wanted to do already. Sometimes with her clients, they may not know what they really need to do. So sometimes we might have to kind of frame what direction they would like to go in based on some of their goals. But with my client, she really already had a mission. She was very driven. It was just a matter of her wanting to become a better person, become a better mother, and how can she reach that again. So again, with her self autonomy respected, I never, threw my opinion out there. I never forced anything on her. It was really just a matter of her, wanting to have these resources and following up on it so she can move on forward with her life. So thank you for your time. This is my psychosocial assessment on how I was able to navigate with the engagement, the assessment, and intervention goals with my client and how I was able to do it for them.